Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, a managing director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. In the news today, two men convicted of Malcolm X's assassination have been exonerated. And President Biden was in Michigan yesterday, touring an electric vehicle plant to promote his climate agenda. Today's topic is the hunt for talent, and we are joined by Chloe Drew, Chief People Officer for Eden Health, Tony Woods, Head of Talent for Schmidt Futures, and Zaina, Orbai, you just told me how to say it, Orbai, Chief People Officer for The Real Real. How are you guys? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Good.
Doing great. Happy to be here.
Well, look, I think this is the one conversation that's kind of been percolating personally, professionally for me and with anybody we're talking to. It's really every article you pick up, it's the great attrition, the great resignation, people, talent, recruitment, retention. At a high level, how hard is it out there to find talent? Let's just frame it there. Maybe we'll start with you, Chloe.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to see you, Ken, and also Zaina and Tony. This is really such a pleasure. Look, my Eden talent team and my HR colleagues across industry would say they haven't seen anything like this ever. Most recently, I was at Compass, where certainly the hunt and the sort of fever around tech talent was just incredibly intense. What's so interesting now is we're seeing it across so many other roles and functions. And, we're really lucky. We're growing exponentially. Our retention rates are just extraordinarily strong. I really credit our mission and the good work that we're doing in the world. But what I'm observing and hearing from candidates, and I think I would be so curious to hear what my colleagues here would say, people are recalibrating what they want out of their lives. And they're thinking about what is my purpose and what kind of place do I want to work? And so I really see our highest and best use as a people team right now, making Eden a fabulous place for people to spend time and do great work and feel belonging. To me, that's our best recruiting lever. And I'd just be so curious to hear what my colleagues are seeing as well.
Yeah, Zaina, why don't you pick up?
Yeah, I would say, no, it is an all-time high. And to me, there's like three things that are happening that are creating these labor market dynamics. One is we've seen that, all-time jobs are at an all-time high. And we thought, April, May, June was going to be sort of a 3-month phenomenon. And in fact, it just, it keeps spiking. And then you look at the stats of like less people have returned for a lot of reasons. So more jobs, less people have returned. And then I think the most interesting thing around this whole great resignation is of the people working, 40 to 50% are making a switch. And and it's for a lot of different reasons. Career progression, title, comp, location, flexibility, or all of the above. There are jobs that will give you all of those things. And so for us, we've been really investing a lot in career progression that, make that jump at TRR, at the real versus having to feel like you have to go elsewhere. And if, in fact, I talk about this a lot, but people are getting jobs that they maybe would not, it would probably be 3 to 4 years from now in a typical market. And so everything's accelerated. And I tell my team, if you're on the edge of promoting someone, do it now, because guess what? Someone's already going to give them that job and pay them probably twice as much. So yeah, I think we're on a very accelerated timeline, which means people are getting jobs, the next job or bigger jobs faster than we've ever seen because of the labor market shortage. And that impacts all levels, from an hourly employee, frontline, all the way up to a CEO, really.
Fascinating. Tony?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with Zaina and Chloe. I think I'm seeing two things from my kind of vantage point. The folks who make your organization run, who aren't necessarily at sort of whatever the front line is of your particular business, I think even more so, they're in a place where they want to make work for them. And they have a tremendous number of options and are looking really critically at those types of opportunities. So we've seen it really in finding really great administrative support, recruiters. It's a very hot market. We hire a very wide variety of roles. So we also do hire people at the leading edge of AI, ML, people who are software engineers. And these are also just incredibly hot fields right now. So it is difficult to ensure that you're being really competitive and creating a really compelling offer for them. The other thing I think I've noticed is, and maybe it feels like an advantage in some ways working in the social impact space for us. People really want to sort of see their values reflected at work, and they want to feel good about what it is that they're doing. And so for us at Schmidt Futures, we bet early on exceptional people making the world better. That's our mission, is how do we find really, really exceptional people who want to do good for the world and then scale their ideas. And so that has been an advantage for us, for that technologist who spent time at a big tech company working on ads or working on the next dating algorithm. And now they want to do something that's good for humanity in a different way. And so we hope that they could come to us for that.
So Tony, just stay on you for a second. So you have this role obviously as head of talent at Schmidt Futures, but you also kind of oversee the Schmidt Futures Center for Digital Talent. Like, what is that? What are you guys thinking about from like a thought leadership perspective? Obviously, when you think Eric Schmidt and you think about you guys, obviously we're always looking to see what's the future hold and what are you working on? What are you thinking about? Just a small skip here. You can just tell us what we should expect.
Of course. This one I think is actually a fascinating problem, and it's one that I think all of us as citizens of the United States ought to care a lot about. So Eric Schmidt, from his really terrific work on the Defense Innovation Board and the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, realized it's absolutely critical that our nation have really phenomenal technologists working in government. And he thought, well, how can I be helpful in doing that? And so we've stood up the Center for Digital Talent to essentially expand and enrich the national security technical workforce. But we really think of that pretty broadly defined. Critical infrastructure, that's really important, obviously, too, from a national security perspective. Election infrastructure, also very important. And so government is a very, very big, there's incredibly high demand for technical talent, but they are competing with all of us on this screen who need technical talent, and all the big tech companies who are, all the places that you'd think that technologists would want to go. But the challenge is doublefold for those who work in government. The pipelines and pathways that we're finding are really broken. I think I saw a stat the other day that it's less than 7% of the technical workforce in government is under the age of 35. And I'm not saying this is sort of as an ageist thing, but I think we all know that young technologists grow to be senior technologists, and you've got to start somewhere. And so something feels a little bit askew in the government space, and I think we all need to care about that as citizens.
So Chloe, how do you think about that? The upskilling, the diversification of a talent base, a lot of roles open, but not a lot of people. How should we be thinking about this on a more macro level? Like, what skills are needed for Eden Health? Where are those skills not materializing? Where do you need help? What should policymakers be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I guess I'd answer that in a couple of ways. One of the reasons that I'm at Eden is I was so compelled by our founder and CEO's vision for what he's trying to create for patients globally. Certainly we're working domestically now, but we're trying to create a healthcare system for the digital age. And the way that I think about the journey of an employee at a company is very much the way we think about what our patients need and the way that they navigate what is, I think we'd all agree, a broken and confusing and demoralizing healthcare system broadly. And what we're trying to do is create a world in which every patient has a relationship with a primary care provider that they trust, who they know for a long time. So we employ our primary care physicians as full-time employees, which makes such a difference in their happiness and satisfaction. By the way, if you're going to talk about kind of game-changing views on the future of work, when I talk to our clinicians, they talk about the experience of seeing 6 to 8 patients in a day for 30 to 45 minutes, when they used to see 30 patients in a day for 10 or 15 minutes. So they are living out the future of work at Eden. So we hire some of the best clinicians there are to find. But what we're trying to do for them is give them the chance to be the carers of patients and the stewards of someone's healthcare experience in a totally different way. So, in terms of upskilling, what's really interesting, and I think about this a lot, we're in a knowledge economy. And in a knowledge economy, our people, it's sort of been a cliche for some time to talk about people are your core product. But for us, our clinicians truly are. Our happy patients are only satisfied and cared for if our clinicians are cared for. And so we hire functional talent that's really strong, but making sure that they have the opportunity to give deep care that's dedicated and give people real minutes. So I really think of this as a moment where giving people the chance to develop their skills around communication and the way that they collaborate with each other is incredibly important to us.
Interesting. When we're thinking about this, Zaina, how are you thinking about like leveraging the brand of the Real, right? Like we were chatting before we went live. You know, we do office leasing by day, and that was obviously slow during COVID. And I was joking with my wife because she was putting dresses on the Real, right? Like you have this brand kind of equity. How do you leverage that? How do you take advantage of that when you go out to the marketplace to kind of recruit and attract talent? I mean, I feel like everything now, it's less about human resources. It's more about almost marketing and PR.
It is so much about marketing and branding, and also making it easy and frictionless. I mean, I just talked to a company and their whole thing is like, reduce all the speed. Yes, you have to have the interviews, but less clicks. And how do you get back to people faster so that you can get them in your interview pipe than before, you know, they already have an offer. And so speed has a lot to do with it. Marketing has a lot to do with it. At the Real, it's interesting because we've got lots of different jobs that, you know, it's sort of tech intersects with fashion and e-commerce and retail. And we also have warehouses. And for us, this whole thing around, you know, skill building, you know, there's the policymaker, but there's also partnering up with universities, providing scholarships. So, you know, for example, one area that is a very specialty job at the Real is fine jewelry experts. They're gemologists. So they basically are authenticating, you know, some of the finest like gems in the world. And so you actually have to be certified to do that well. And there aren't enough people graduating in that degree versus what we need. And so we have to sort of build that skill set. And a couple of ways we've done that is partner with universities on their curriculum, incentivize people to enroll, and then internally thinking about, okay, well, we needed 10 years of experience. How do we carve it out that there's 2 years of experience and it's part of the job, and then you can grow into the full job. So we're getting creative with the way we're designing jobs. So if people can't meet the criteria of the job and the way it's designed today, how do we carve back and create our own pipeline essentially of get people in the door, trained so that they can then grow into that job? And so so a lot of, again, is on career growth, because we've got so many different jobs and there aren't people there that, you know, have that specialty. But the nice thing is through, you know, you can come into the Real and most people have one brand experience. Maybe they were at Tiffany or Cartier or Gucci or whatever. Here you can get exposure to hundreds of brands, you know, in a daily basis. And so your ability to you know, build that skill set through an internship, through, you know, a couple months of training is far outweighs, you know, doing maybe 3 years, you know, at a brand. And so we're, you know, it's really thinking about what are the differentiators people have in their company and really getting creative to incentivize new people to enter the workforce.
And if I could chime in and follow up on Zaina's point, you know, our challenge at Schmidt Futures is actually slightly different. For a very long time, we wanted to be the most impactful sort of philanthropic initiative you've never heard of. Now that is starting to change. Our work, you know, is starting to speak for itself, and we're excited about starting to tell that story. But what I think is really important is starting to tell authentic stories, because I think people, when they're looking for their next opportunity, really want to kick the tires and get to know an employer. And so having a very active sort of LinkedIn culture page, starting to tell testimonials of your employees and what the experience would be like working there. You know, there's got to be that heft below the brand, where people feel that there's substance there that they can see themselves reflected in and get excited about working at a place like Schmidt Futures. We've found that goes a long way, in addition to having a good brand story as well.
Tony, Sorry, go ahead,
Okay,
Zaina.
Chloe, I'll jump in after you.
I couldn't agree more about the cultural component. I say to people, I'm sort of too old to not work at a place anymore that's deeply kind and deeply healthy. And I haven't worked at a place quite like Eden before. And what is so distinct for me, and I screened for this, and I think our people really screened for this, is that our culture is such an intentional focus of our CEO and our co-founder. And I've never worked at a place where the culture doesn't flow right from the top. And so what I find, I love what you said, Tony, because what I observe with all of our employees, and we just finished our annual engagement survey, for people married up, almost as equally important is their connection to our mission and goals and purpose, highly critical. But just as important is that people looked for cultural fit. They wanted to be a place where they felt deep belonging, a sense of connection to each other. And by the way, we're a remote first company, so we don't actually see each other. But every single day, we do a 15-minute daily all hands. And so for 15 minutes, people tune in. I know, right? I hadn't seen this before, but I have this experience every day, sort of a shot in the arm of connection with the whole company. So that's just one thing that we do. But I think purpose plus culture is one of the things that we are trying to be very intentional about.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with Tony and Chloe. And I think the other word, the purpose and the culture and the connection, like people are looking to feel connected to something bigger than, sort of themselves in a way. And they, since we spend so much time at work, that's the way to do that. Whether it's sort of extending their values, feeling like they're working on something that matters, it's creating a positive difference. And that's always been true, but I think even more over the last 12 months. I hear all the time when I do like new hire check-ins at 90 days with all leaders and above. And the biggest thing I hear is, the commitment to sustainability, your commitment to diversity. And I thought like that's sort of different than maybe what I used to hear of why people joined, a year and a half ago. The leading factor is you hit me on an emotional level, and that's why I want to work here first. And then of course there's, all the other pieces. So I couldn't agree more.
So you three are responsible as kind of, chief marketing officers, chief people officers, chief social impact officers. And now in my day job, we don't have a meeting with a client on the real estate side without a chief people person, rightfully so. How do you think about the future? Folks are planning on getting back to the office potentially in January. How do you think about physical space and human interaction? Everyone is hiring remotely. People are dispersed. Some are in town, some are not. Geography doesn't really seem to matter for a lot of companies. How do you think about that? And what are you advising your senior leadership about? What do we need in terms of a physical presence? Is it a retreat every quarter where everybody comes? Is it space where people come in a couple of days a week? Is it everyone virtual? How are you thinking through this? And, no particular order. Maybe we start with Chloe and work our way around.
Sure. And we're so interesting because we serve patients in two modalities, in person and virtually. And we also have employees, and we're remote first. We're not remote only, but we have sort of early on committed to being a company where we could hire talent from absolutely anywhere. And I think we're going to sort of see it through the winter because obviously with new variants, and I think we are a healthcare company. And so we're going to want to make sure that we privilege health and safety above all. But we're thinking about, Ken, you and I've been talking about, we're thinking about the future of our office in a number of different respects, that it be inspiring, that it be a place that people want to come, that we're intentional about what we do there and what we can do quietly in our, I'm in my bedroom, I'm in a nook in my bedroom right now. This is good for certain deep thinking parts of my job. But we also did a company offsite in September, and it was a game changer in terms of our ability to connect. We have budgets for people to get their teams together on a biannual basis, everybody together for 2 days of deep work. And I think it accelerates our ability to be more effective when we're working remotely again. I personally go to the office a couple of days a week because I like to see people, and there's a level of collaboration you can only do at a whiteboard. I think we all know that. So I think it's interesting because chief people officers are so deeply in the business of thinking about workplace in ways that some of us were, but not all of us were before.
Yeah. Zaina?
Yeah, I think for us, I agree with everything Chloe said. It's really intentionality and flexibility. I think are kind of the two that are playing in the hybrid workplace. We do have obviously a whole host of employees that are essential, meaning they have to be in a physical workplace to touch product, right? So I think, if we take those off the table, because there's no way for them to do their job. But I think for the corporate employees, we've created a system where on Wednesdays is sort of the day that everybody comes into the office. Yes, you can opt out, so not everyone's coming back. And that's kind of the day of like buzz, reconnect, how's your week going? And then Mondays are a lighter day. So Monday and Wednesdays, the execs are in. And we encourage anyone who wants to sort of, be there. And we find that that those are sort of the 2 days that get arranged around meetings that are in person. There tend to be more collaboration meetings, cross-functional meetings. And then you've got your other days, more your down days, right? Of like, you're going to do that sort of deep thinking or focus on a project. And that seems to be the right mix. I mean, we're all constantly pulsing people. I would say we've sent out a few surveys every 6 months of like, what's the right mix? And we're finding that, sort of, I would say 1.5 to 3 or 2 days together seems to be what people need and want. And then a couple days to then, work remotely so that they can then, sort of, have that time for working time. So that's the blend we are approaching, that people want both, but they don't want all of one and all of another. And if you do want, say, you want to be in the office all 5 days a week, you absolutely can. And we're, it's open and available because some people don't have the workspace and they feel like they can, have that dedicated time. And if you don't want to come in, so we've really leaned on flexibility with the blend of both, with dedicated days of when people are in the office. So, and that seems to be working well, but it's one of those things that will continue to evolve. And I agree with Chloe too, in terms of this office inspiration. I don't know that we've reimagined the office, but the way people move is very much now a shared space. Like on those Mondays and Wednesdays, no one's at their desk. At this point, we've sort of gotten rid of desks. It's kind of hoteling. Okay, you're going to come in with your team, book a certain area. So it's really turned into shared spaces, which is kind of fun to see too. That, people come together to really connect rather than like sit at their desk. But yeah, I think it's there is, some of the leading companies that I've seen, they've literally transformed the workplace to make it sort of this coffee lounge space that like you want to come there and maybe be on your laptop, but hopefully you bump into a colleague and it, creates this serendipity conversation, which is sort of the beauty of, office culture. So I think that's where the future is.
I want Tony to jump in, but just to piggyback on that, I mean, all we hear really now is it's hospitality, right? It's this sense of like coming to the office is almost an event. So it warrants that type of production where if you're going to come in only 2 or 3 times a week, it's like, okay, well, what's the hospitality? What's the vibe? The, informal connectivity, how is it happening? And so on. I mean, because you're competing against people leaving their own home, right? It's like, what's going to actually draw you out? So go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, it's a great point, Ken, and Zaina. I want to hear some of the lessons learned you all have, and same with you, Chloe. I think for us, we were quite similar. We were listening to our workforce. What we've landed on is a hybrid work schedule. We think flexibility is really, really critical. So for us, it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, opportunity to be in the office, to collaborate, to work together. We're sort of slowly transitioning into that. That's begun as of, I want to say, November 1st. And I think there's real value and power in that. The other piece, Chloe, you mentioned kind of you all did a work retreat. We actually just had ours a couple weeks ago, and it was really quite incredible. What it reminded me of is this kind of reality that in many ways, in the beginning of the pandemic, you're kind of operating on borrowed time, in the sense that, well, I had a relationship with this person. And so, yeah, we can kind of transition to Zoom and kind of continue to work together because we've built a rapport. But what coming together just a couple of weeks ago taught me, there's a lot of people who we haven't had an opportunity to build that rapport with yet. And so getting together, getting to know one another, realizing why your colleagues are special is something you have to be really, really intentional about and manufacture in a very deliberate way to make sure those opportunities exist.
Tony, just stay on that for a second, right? I was reading one of these McKinsey studies that just came out, and in there they had a really unique thing that I think it'd be interesting to hear your perspective on, all three of you. Non-white employees were more likely than white counterparts to say that they left their job because they didn't feel a sense of belonging at their company. How has that kind of evolved through the pandemic, post George Floyd? We've talked a little bit about creating a culture and social impact. I mean, how are you thinking through that sense of just belonging and what people are going through? And maybe as an extension of that, love your thoughts on that, but also just like mental health and just the toll this is taking. I mean, would love, because you guys aren't doing enough already. So,
Yeah. It's a really, really phenomenal point. And, so in many ways, Schmidt Futures is a medium stage startup. When I started, I was around employee number 25 or so. We're on our way to about 110 now. So we are rapidly, rapidly growing and building in those opportunities for very real and meaningful connection based on individual experience, life experience. So we're standing up employee resource groups, for example, to provide those sort of linkages that give people the space to connect and to vent and to sort of share those types of experiences. I know coming out of, well before the protests related to George Floyd's murder, but especially since, those have been really, really powerful opportunities just to exchange how we're feeling and to check in with one another and to build community, doing so in a virtual way that actually has worked. But we also then translated that into inviting broader conversation with the organization. We work with a brilliant woman who runs an organization called Win Strategies, and she helped sort of lead the organization through a series of workshops on having brave conversations, helping to get past the sort of the superficial with colleagues of a different perspective and experience, and getting to know them and having real conversations about important topics like race, gender, orientation, all the different ways and all the different things we bring to the workplace. Maybe shifting gears slightly though, your question on mental health, I actually think is a really important one. And I actually think is related to our earlier conversation. I am fortunate enough where my husband and I live in a house with plenty of space. I'm not a single person, and we have family who lives with us. That is a very different experience than my colleagues who live in a studio apartment in New York City. And in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a part of me that's just like, it's vital that we all sort of retreat to our spaces and for health and safety purposes. But I do realize that the mental health aspect of this is not something that we can trivialize, and being able to create connections with our colleagues is important. We do bring that part of ourselves to the workplace, and being thoughtful and intentional about that is important. The last quick point that I would say is it also exposes, and Chloe would be more of an expert on this than I would, but our mental health system here in the United States is largely broken. It is becoming the right of the privileged, frankly, who can afford to go to out-of-network therapists, who afford who have flexible enough jobs to make time to go and to take advantage of those types of things. So that's something that our workforce is saying is very important. We think about it from a health and benefits standpoint very, very seriously, and there's always more that we can do.
Ken, I think it's so smart that you folded the conversation together, sort of an employee's experience on many different vectors, including the big and important conversations about social movements last year. And it was interesting, I did DI advisory work during the pandemic, and people talked so consistently about what was happening in the streets, in their own families, but also they talked a lot about their experiences of mental fatigue and burnout as contributing to their feelings of disconnection from work or connection. And it's so interesting now because I work at a company with mental health experts, and we just led a lunch and learn yesterday by one of our own colleagues about well-being and mental fatigue. And one of the big themes, and there's a lot of conversation, was the need to destigmatize the conversation just to begin with, because we are so afraid, we don't feel like we have the right vocabulary to talk about it, even that it's a spectrum. There's serious mental health issues and crises of burnout all the way to I'm overwhelmed and stressed and I need some support, but I don't need this level of solution. So figuring out where people are on that spectrum and then figuring what the right kinds of solutions are. I will say we think about it a lot from a health and benefits perspective, but also there was some interesting research last year that showed that over 60% of people said that when their boss cares about them, when they know that they have a manager who knows them, is aware of what's going on in their lives, their most extreme feelings of stress and mental fatigue can be mitigated. I'm not saying that's a panacea, but we are very intentional about one-on-one meetings, and we're going to be instituting quarterly check-ins, certainly about performance, but also how are you doing? How can I help? HR has to become more and more personal, because my solution is different from Tony's, is different from Zaina's. So I need a boss who knows me and has a range of levers to work with me on, everything from wellness days, which we are thinking about, to, mental health benefits and resources around actual practitioners.
That's great. Zaina?
Gosh, so those are two very big topics, but such important ones. I'll start with the mental health. On the grand scheme of things, my perspective is the pressure is still building, and it's sort of going to hit a crisis before there's sort of like actual policy in place that comes to fruition. And in some ways, it was sort of the DEI story. I mean, diversity, inclusion, and belonging has been a topic for decades, but it really came to the forefront and everybody started paying attention at a moment of crisis. And so to me, maybe I'm a little bit more dire on the mental health, because I think people are more burnt out this year than they were last year. And this great resignation is sort of like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to quit and pause, because I can't juggle all these things in my life at the same time. And I don't really have an outlet to create that. And as a company, we're of course investing in modern health, time off, e-sick, all those things. But I think there's probably some sort of systematic things too, with how do you deal with aging parents, newborns? I mean, the system has to, come together as well. So it'll be interesting where it goes. I think the companies are doing the best they can, but it's probably, ripe for disruption, I'm sure in the near future here as we look at policy. The piece on just, I think Tony talked about, sort of his experience and, what home looks like to him versus, someone else. I think the biggest learning and takeaway for me was everybody was having a unique experience during the pandemic. And while it felt like a global experience, it was a global experience as well. It was unique in the sense of, if you live alone, you feel isolated. If you live with 3 kids, you can't sort of just like get any space, right? And so there's sort of these extreme situations people were going through. And even in the DEI movement, I think depending on what part of the country, your race, your upbringing, your understanding on the topic, I think was a different experience as well. And so for us, it was really about investing in capacity building at the Real, because there is an uneven understanding on the topic just by the nature of people's backgrounds and what they've lived through. And so we started at the top of like, we've got a very diverse executive team of like, what is our understanding so that we can then collectively commit on this topic. And so we, hired an outside coach. And so there was a lot of capacity building. And then we started bringing that down at, each level. And, going back to your very first question on, hey, depending on your race, maybe you didn't feel you left because of belonging. I think there was a psychological burden that certain groups were experiencing on top of the pandemic, mental health, everything else that, when not acknowledged, feels like people don't understand, right? And so I think there was a collective understanding of like, there are certain groups that have a heavier psychological burden. So how do we lift them up and make sure we give them the space to sort of work through that? And if they need to take some days off, they do that, right? And it wasn't an equal experience. So yeah, to me, I think it was all about, really acknowledging that people's experiences were unique. And what were those subset groups to make sure that we lift them up? And, employee resource groups, now we're at a different time and there's all this great programming that we're doing and people are feeling connected. But I think, to me, it came down to sort of meeting people where they were at.
I could add one follow-up point, Ken, to something that Zaina mentioned. I think kind of tying back to where we started with the Great Resignation, I actually think an underlying component that I haven't heard a lot of folks talk about is a mental health component. I think we globally have been going through a lot. There's a lot of deep-seated unhappiness and sort of general feeling mentally unwell. And I think it gets hard to sort of pinpoint exactly the source. And I think when that's the case, when it's sort of a chronic stress that we're all immersed in or stewed in all the time, people think, I don't know exactly what's wrong here, but I know I need change. And work happens to be one of the easier ones that you can kind of make a change in, relative to, I'm just going to up and leave my, house or move or do this or that. And I think that's partially fueling some of the desire to make a shift.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to add on to Tony, to what Tony said too, with this mental health stuff, it's interesting because I just sat through, it was like a 3-hour benefits review, where they kind of go through what's happening in your organization and the macro. And so there was a macro slide, and I'm not going to quote the exact stats, but basically we got into this discussion of there is the sort of the medical health issue, but the emotional impact of that lingers and continues. And so now we're starting to see, 3-4x times of the emotional behavioral issues. And that might be anxiety, that might be stress, that might be, things that are related to grief, and understanding the trends. It was interesting that our Cigna rep basically said is like, this will linger and it actually will get worse before it gets better. And so I think we have to acknowledge that, like, we went through the experience, but there's all these side effects that we have to now sort of work through with our workforce, which aren't apparent because you can't see them necessarily because they're, kind of emotional issues people are dealing with that I don't know that people have processed themselves.
Yeah. I think that's right. Not just linger, but also potentially re-experience, which is going to be very triggering, not to make this overly personal, but my 6-year-old went into 10 days of quarantine today because she has a fellow first grader who tested positive, and it brings up so many sharp memories of last year. And if I'm experiencing it, I know my colleagues are, and I know employees are more broadly, because we're heading into a winter where we're going to expect to see some of the same dynamics as we did last winter. So as HR leaders, being prepared to support people through this, because I think it's going to feel quite sharp. Oh my God, we're going through this again, and we're so exhausted.
Mm-hmm. So to close this out, one quick round robin, staying on diversity, equity, inclusion. It's something that we try to talk a lot about on our series here. And we had this amazing woman, I don't know if you all know, Frida Poli from Pymetrics, right? And this is a company that was created to try to eliminate bias in hiring, where they go to companies and they help kind of eliminate implicit bias that you may not even know is happening. Where if, Jamal White submits an application, it doesn't mean, but if James White does, it does, these kind of things. How are you thinking through ensuring that you're attracting talent and giving unbiased opportunity to folks, potentially even expanding roles, responsibilities, and skill sets, right? Like it used to be, hey, I went to Harvard, I have my, MBA, I did 2 years at Citibank, okay, I can come here, right? Like, how are you rethinking finding talent and softer skills that maybe a certain population has and might be a good fit for your different companies? So I know a lot to unpack there, but just kind of, this is so much at the core of just getting the right people in there, expanding access to opportunity, taking out bias, and kind of maybe expanding the labor pool in a way we're not thinking of. So, Tony, this is so complicated. Maybe we'll start with you because Schmidt Futures probably already figured this out. But
exactly, we've invented a software tool to handle it for us.
Yeah,
no, not at all. You're right. It is a complicated one. There are a variety of best practices out there. My team has looked at identifying ways to integrate as many of those as we possibly can into our hiring process. On the tactical side, that's things like developing really rigorous rubrics that we use to evaluate and screen resumes, and actually to evaluate and ensure we get high quality, unbiased feedback in the interview process. There are words you're not supposed to use. There are questions you are supposed to ask, and there are things, and there are ways we want you to kind of communicate that. Like, don't just give us like, they sort of have the right fit, or this sort of seem like they'd be a good sort of culture fit. No, like, tell me why. Give me tangible examples. Like, actually explain that, because we're not, sort of looking for opportunities for bias to kind of creep in that way. We have a variety of talent programs, one of which is our Associate Product Manager program, which looks to find exceptional recent computer science graduates. And instead of them going to Facebook, Google, Amazon, they would come to us, and we deploy them out to a nonprofit that will benefit from those skills. And one of the things that we've introduced into that process is blind resume reading. So your name is actually not really important to us at all in any early phase of that process. And then being really intentional and deliberate about finding additional sources of talent that focuses on diverse candidates. Minority serving institutions, HBCUs, programs that focus on women in STEM. Like, there's just so many ways to diversify your pipeline and ensure that you're ensuring that there's more opportunities for people of all backgrounds to get a chance at these opportunities. The last piece I'd raise is we're also really deliberate about making sure that once we start to get to final stages of interviews, that a hiring manager is considering very well qualified applicants that are from have a diversity of experiences and perspectives. And so I think being a little bit of intentionality goes a long way. Maybe not reinventing the wheel and looking out there, because there are best practices, and integrating them into your processes tends to work.
Great. Chloe?
I think all of those are the right strategies, Tony. I think that's really, really smart, because it is many, many things. And of course, we can't eliminate bias, but we can do a lot to mitigate it. The only thing I would add to what you said, and I'm sure you do this too, Tony, we are very intentional about transparency around our data. And so we share it out on a weekly basis with our leadership. We look at where our diversity numbers are from representation of the talent that we're hiring, because we're growing so fast. We want to be very, very intentional about it. Geography is to our benefit, because we've opened up our talent pools nationally. So we are not wedded to just the East Coast or to certain markets in California. So that's really helpful. I will just say one quick story briefly, but I am such a loyalist to having an idea of a goal and a target. When I was the head of appointments for the mayor of New York, we established targets that we were shooting for, and we met them. In fact, we exceeded them. And it's like any other business challenge. You would have targets in sales, you would have targets in marketing, you'd have targets in any other part of a business growth strategy. To me, that's what having a diverse and representative team is. And so I'm a big fan of having a sense of where we're heading and holding ourselves accountable and looking transparently at data as we go.
Nice. Zaina?
Yeah, I feel like you guys have exhausted all the, I would agree with everything they said. So maybe what I can add here is, outside of just looking at hiring, I would also encourage people to bring those same practices, basically everything they brought to the promotion and the calibration process, right? Because the last thing you want is you're bringing diverse talent in and they are spinning out of the system faster. And so you've sort of got a leaky bucket. You put all this effort in to partner with the right vendors and mitigate bias and so forth, but you've got bias in the system as well, right? And we all do, and we know that. So another metric in terms of rigor and is around promotions, and we do see it there in the data. And so how do we sort of mitigate that and what's happening at those levels, and how do we sort of pull the talent? Because as you know, a lot of organizations, they're very diverse at sort of entry early stage, but they get less and less diverse as you move up. And so instead of just trying to inject from the outside, I think the same disciplines and practices and everything they shared should be applied to the promotion process too.
Zaina, Tony, Chloe, such a treat. Appreciate you all coming on Coffee with Ken, sharing some of these thoughts. It's absolutely amazing what's kind of fallen on this evolving role of people. I mean, from mental health, DEI, social impact, recruitment, retention, hospitality, real estate. I mean, the list just goes on. And it's great and timely, and we're excited to have all of you. So thank you for being here. Thanks for everyone tuning in. Our next Coffee with Ken is going to be on the future of e-commerce on December 14th with Tyler Shriven, the founder of Saltbox. In the meantime, you can visit us at coffeewithken.com to catch up on past sessions and future ones. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving and look forward to talking to you all soon.